Welcome to Every Musical Ever. This podcast contains strong language and it's not suitable for children.
Prepare ye the way of the Lord. It's Godspell week on Every Musical Ever. Later this week, I'll be talking to Stephen Schwartz himself. Today, I'm joined by Gillian Cosgriff to talk Godspell.
It's time to chat, just you and me. How many musicals can there be? I hope that there's infinity. Kettle on and pour the tea. Every musical ever. It's a show that is so clever. It's a very fine endeavor. Every musical ever.
Hello, welcome to another episode of Every Musical Ever. I'm your host, Richard Carroll. I'm going to do a very brief intro this week because I won't go into details, but I had one of those nightmare scenarios where the show was almost edited and the project disappeared. I had to do the whole thing over again. I won't bore you with the details, but needless to say, I think that God was trying to tell me something. Possibly that he didn't want to hear my blasphemous thoughts about this show, even though I love it very much. However, here is the re-edited show for you, even better the second time around. It's an incredibly exciting week. As I said in the intro, I talked to Stephen Schwartz, the composer of Godspell, as well as, of course, Wicked and so many other amazing shows. That conversation is on Friday's episode. And before that, I had a really great conversation with Gillian Cosgriff about Godspell. We go into so much. We had a particular focus on the music in this episode because the songs in Godspell are so great. So dig in. I hope you enjoy it. As always, I really want to hear from you. We're at Every Musical Pod on all forms of social media. You can email everymusicalpod@gmail.com. Links are in the episode description. Use that to check out our Patreon as well. Thank you, as always, for listening. Here's me and Gillian Cosgriff talking about Godspell.
It's the first proper musical I was ever in. In year 10, I auditioned. I didn't audition for the musical in year 9 because I was too nervous.
Oh.
And then I was like, don't screw this up again. And so I auditioned for the musical in grade 10 and I was in Godspell, and it was had such a profound impact on me. And this will really date the story because it had such an impact on me that Godspell was my MSN Messenger password.
Wow. And
yeah.
Okay, so what's year 10 is what, like 15, 16?
Yeah, I was 14, but yes, most
14.
people are 15.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, so this was 2001.
Yeah, and I was also in it in high school. I think I was 16 or maybe even 17, so a little bit older. But again, it had a massive impact on me. And, well, let's talk about why. Why don't you go first? What was it about the show or the experience that had such an impact on you?
Well, I've been in it twice. So I was in it at high school, which was a revelation. And then I was also in a very shady community theatre production of it a few years later where I was supposed to be the music director. And then I became the music director. I was Joanne? No, I was never Joanne. Peggy.
Oh, yeah.
And then I also became the assistant choreographer. It was a mess.
It's that kind of show. It's just everyone just, you can also sing that song now.
All hands on deck. Maybe this is the most I've ever prepared for an audition in my life when I knew that it was coming up for year 10. So I had the whole summer. I went to Alan's Music and I ordered in and bought the sheet music of a medley of Godspell to play through all the songs.
Oh my God.
This was the one summer that my family ever had Foxtel because we were living in this rental house and it was like a consolation for my parents because we were all sharing bedrooms as teenagers. And the movie was on Showtime at 1 a.m. And I
sounds about right.
begged to be able to stay up so I could make sure I recorded it on VHS. So I had it as research. I just have never been so prepared for anything in all my life.
That's fabulous. Was it a bit of a letdown? Like, you'd go to the audition and sing 3 bars and they were like, oh yeah, you're fine, you're in.
I think so, yeah.
They're this is a high school musical. I don't...
Yeah, you did not need to bring a chart. You did not need to... This was not required. If only that over-preparation had followed me into the rest of my career, it would be a different story. But I love... the school musical is such a formative place for, friendships, and it meant that it was, the one time in the year where people would suddenly be like, wait, weren't you in that thing? And I'd be like, yes, also I go to your school. You have recognized my face.
Yes, I have made an impact on people's lives.
Yeah.
I am seen.
Yeah.
Yes, that drug.
One of the things that's kind of incredible about Godspell is that you're allowed to do kind of whatever you want. with the material, so you're allowed to update it. So we had like one of the sketches, I think it was like the sketches, the Bible stories, as they're more formally known.
The bits.
The bits. I love Matthew's bits. The Prodigal Son we did as like The Bold and the Beautiful. We did it as like a soap opera.
Oh, wow. Cool.
We did one of the bits with the judge as like Judge Judy, and I got to be Judge Judy. And
Heavens.
it was very like also peak the Amanda Show with Amanda Bynes.
Right. It's this
So
very
it was just,
daytime
like,
television
stealing
based,
that material.
this vision for the show.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Yeah, what did you do? What kinds of references did you have when you did it?
Oh, well, it wasn't really like that when we did it. So we did it at high school, and what it was there was, the various school musicals that you did, and like, I can't remember exactly how it worked out, but it was like, there was one at the end of every year or whatever it was. And then when I was like 16, our drama teacher had some kind of like nervous breakdown or something, and we got a former pupil came and filled in and ended up being there for like most of the rest of the year. And he was only like, I don't know, early 20s, but I think he'd been to Lambda or RADA or some other drama schools, and they were like, that'll do. And so they got him in at short notice. So it's my dog behind me. He's dreaming. Can you keep it down, please, Buck? So he came in, and so everything was a bit like, because I was doing a theatre studies A level at the time, and everything was a bit like, oh, everything's a bit weird and off, and we don't really know what we're doing, but okay. And he decided straight away that he wanted to do Godspell with us. It was like a bonus production. It wasn't like the school production. And it was all a bit like, oh God, guys, we're just like putting the show on. Why not? And also the teacher, the ex-pupil who'd just been to drama school and then was coming to teach us, he played Judas. So it was a bit like, oh, I see. Okay, yes. Got it. And there were two other teachers in it too, so that was all a bit strange as well. It was really like, for someone who went to like, a boys' school in England, which was very sort of formal, it was like a bit like, oh guys, this is just wild. It was my first taste of like, we can be creative and like, we can just be crazy. But the production itself, I mean, I look back on it very fondly, and it had really good people in it. Like, if I think about the people who were in it, many of them have gone on to be professional actors. Mm-hmm. But I wouldn't say it had an overarching theme. It was more like watching the movie like last week for the first time. I'd never seen it. I was like, oh yeah, okay, that bit we ripped off for the movie. That bit we ripped off for the movie. And things like that.
I did the same thing when I watched the movie back. And I was like, oh yes, we did steal this.
Yeah. And we did this sort of, it's not exactly clowns, it's not exactly hippies, that sort of Godspell look, but we were sort of in that world as well.
Yeah.
So I think what I remember is, the previous school plays and school musicals that I've been in were very much like, okay, we're doing like Hello Dolly, so this is what it is, and this is the song, and you learn it, and then you learn the choreography, and then you do this, and this is where you stand, and blah, blah, blah. It's like, being in a production that comes over from America. But this was one where it was like, oh, it's a bit free, this one, this one you can get off the stage and dance with the audience, and this one you can just all sort of like improvise, and I was like, that was my first taste of any kind of creativity, and I was like, this is amazing. But you're right, it is like, that's the great thing about the show. That's one of the reasons why it still appeals to me as a show. It's just like a series of songs and little bits that you can just kind of hang other things on. It's so nice to have that kind of freedom.
Yeah, it's interesting too, like in the script, the way that a lot of those things are written though is prescribed. Like there's a bit where it's a story about a man, and at the end you're meant to do this like Vincent Price kind of impersonation. Like there were things in it that we didn't understand that we did, like that are very strange, or like the whole bit where they're like, the I of the body is sound. Like all that kind of stuff, the way that it's scripted in there that you end up doing, that you don't fully understand why you're doing it, is really fascinating to me also.
Because first of all, obviously there's all of the biblical references, which I didn't necessarily understand, even though I was Catholic. But then there's also so much which is just from that sort of late 60s, early 70s counterculture sort of vibe that are, I guess, references to things that people picked up on at the time, but we don't know anymore. But like most scripts, it's basically just like, they wrote down what happened in the Broadway production, and that's what they send out. Doesn't mean you have to do it.
No. When I did it in the community theatre production, it was produced and directed by a man who I will just call Jack.
Okay.
And it was his company, and he was this American guy. I mean, he must have been in his late 40s, if not early 50s. Cast himself as Jesus. I mean, Jesus died at 33, but sure, you do you.
It's a push.
And in the set, we had like garbage, like it's meant to be kind of like a junkyard vibe. And so we had this big skip in the center of the stage, and he would be in the skip at the top of the show. And there were shows where we had sold so few tickets. We were in this massive theatre in Brisbane.
Oh, God.
That there would be this weird pre-show mutiny backstage where everyone would be like, there's 6 people. There's more of us than there are of them. We're not going out. We're not doing
That's
the show.
the rule. Guys, that's the rule.
You could never cancel the show because Jack was already in the bin.
Oh, no.
We'd be like, we can't cancel. Jack's in the bin.
He was in the bin metaphorically and literally.
Yeah, it was kind of a good tactical move on his part where he was like, no one can cancel it because I'm already ready to start.
I'm
10
NA
minutes
from
beforehand.
House Open, guys. Sorry.
Yeah.
That brings me to, like, what is the story? What is the world? Because, and again, you think having been in it, I would have a better idea of this, but, you know, I was in high school. And again, I obviously got to thinking this, rewatching the movie and getting ready for our conversation. And I think I'd always thought of it as, you know, it's called, the full title is, like, Godspell, a musical based on the Gospel of St. Matthew or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I always thought, okay, well, it is the story of Jesus and the disciples, but it's just told in a funny way. And it wasn't until I was thinking about it, preparing to talk to you, I was like, well, it's not actually that. They're not the disciples from the Bible. It's a sort of idea of like, what if Jesus came today and there were new disciples? Like, is that how you think of it?
Sort of. It's like a mix of the two for me. Like they're like, I guess modern day disciples, but that you do still get the only bit of the kind of Jesus story that you get that's the same is at the beginning you get John the Baptist as this guy that's doing this evangelical work, baptizing, and then, you know, this like, he who comes after me, I will not be fit to wash his feet. I think it is something like that.
Yeah.
And so he meets Jesus. And then at the end, that same character becomes Judas and basically betrays Jesus for the silver. And then you get kind of a weird crucifixion on a chain link fence.
Yeah.
And then a sort of like allusion to resurrection. But
that was apparently quite controversial. We can talk about that later.
yeah, but in between you're just getting parables. You're not getting like the events of like, you know, Holy Thursday, any of that kind of stuff. Yeah, so it's just to me is like a tapas of Bible stories, like a little of this, a little of that.
Yeah, because of course in the original production they'd use the actors' names, like the real actors' names, and that's what it says in the script still when you license it. So I guess some people do that, but other people perhaps just use the real actors' names. And when they did the Broadway revival in, I think, 2011, they used, again, the names of the real actors in the show. So I think there's definitely a sense of, like, it's us. We're here. We're being this. And obviously, Jesus and Judas and John the Baptist, as you said, have the names of the biblical characters, but everyone else is not, and doesn't appear to be in any other way like any one of the other disciples. So I thought it was interesting. And obviously in the movie as well, because the play, the sort of the setting of the play can be much more sort of like, we're in a sort of a no man's land. It's like Assassins, or it's just like, we're in a space. Whereas in the movie, it's like, we use the New York skyline and the Brooklyn Bridge and Central Park and all that stuff. So you get much more, and especially that beginning section before Prepare Ye the Way of the Lord, that long silent opening where you see John the Baptist coming over Brooklyn Bridge, and then one of them's like working in a laundromat or whatever, and they're all just doing their New York modern lives, and then they hear Prepare Ye the Way of the Lord, and they all run and dance in a fountain.
Well, because the show actually opens with a prologue called The Tower of Babel.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Which is optional. So in the high school version we didn't do it, and in the community theatre production we did do it.
Right.
It's really hard to learn and sing, and it's all
Yes.
these philosophers
Yeah, we did
offering
it.
all these
We
kind
did
of
it.
crazy counterpoints.
It's like a prologue where everyone's credited as a different philosopher, but obviously the audience doesn't know that. They don't understand that you're playing a different character. I mean, we had the same costumes, and everything. So and it's like all the different philosophers through history singing sort of strange recitative about their philosophies and arguing with each other. And I don't remember how, and it sort of all comes to a climax, and then I think gets interrupted by the trumpet, and then Prepare Ye the Way of the Lord. Is that right?
Yeah, the conch shell. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that's supposed to say all of these people have competing ideas, but everyone stand aside because here you're about to learn about Christianity. Like, is that the vibe?
Yeah, I think what's interesting to me about the way that you can tell all the stories, that you're meant to kind of modernize them or make them feel like sketches, or you have the option to do that, is that I think it's kind of trying to be like not overly religious, and to be like, these are just regular people who have like come to Jesus. And there is something about how like each of their songs is meant to be their first kind of like coming to Jesus moment. There's a whole thing where they like paint the symbol on them, and so Robin is first when she sings Day by Day, and she's like the first one to kind of have her come to Jesus moment, and gradually they all take that step. And then that's why at the sort of the Last Supper, which is another reference that you do get pretty clearly, they all wash the paint off.
Oh, yeah.
Which to
I
me is
forgot
kind
that.
of weird. Like, I remember watching it even in the movie and I was like, oh, that's strange to be like, I suppose maybe the idea is like, and now like we've had this time together and now go back in, out into the world and like spread the good word. It is a weird combination of direct
Yeah.
references and then ideas.
And apparently the churches, at the time it was first out and was first to hit, they were quite wary of it. I just assumed that, they would have been like, brilliant, a religious musical. This is good for us. But apparently they're quite wary of it. And I think this is something that gets lost to us as a modern audience, is that the idea of Jesus just being like a guy who hangs out with the disciples and is just a companion as opposed to like a leader. And, that sort of very top-down, structure of a church where, you are told what to do and you have a leader and followers. Whereas this was just like Jesus hanging out and being like, hey guys, let's sing a song together. That's sort of the thrust of the show. And that was pretty revolutionary at the time and was why it was associated with the idea of sort of hippies and counterculture, even though it didn't explicitly strive for that. It's one of those things I think church at the time were quite wary of it. And over the years, they've come to be much more fond of it, as I guess, various churches have sort of caught up to that same kind of philosophy.
Yeah, until I knew we were doing this, it had never occurred to me to think about Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar as these two kind of...
Yeah.
And Jesus Christ Superstar is 1970 and then this is off Broadway in 1971. And they're very different. Jesus Christ Superstar is a much more kind of literal telling of that, time and lead up to crucifixion and resurrection. And this is so much more like allegorical and, a bit clowns, a bit hippies. Like
they are both very much like, hey, the story of Jesus? Well, what if we tell it like it might really have been, like if we think of it with a modern lens, as you say, like Jesus Christ Superstar is less explicitly that in terms of the storytelling, but certainly in productions and in obviously the music. I would have thought that they would developed on different sides of the Atlantic. I would have thought, because obviously this was originally like a university production and then transferred to off-Broadway and Jesus Christ Superstar was a concept album. And so I would have thought that they pretty much developed around the same time in isolation from each other. Like, I don't know the facts on that, but I would have thought that they weren't influenced by each other, which is interesting that they came up at exactly the same time.
Yeah, it's funny too because musically they're very different until you get to the finale in Godspell and you get that, oh God,
Yeah.
I'm dying. And then you get that, and that like suddenly is like quite Jesus Christ Superstar just in that one section.
Yeah.
And there are some interesting points in it too. Like one of the songs that I love in Godspell is alas, alas for you lawyers and Pharisees, hypocrites that you are, which to me reads very much like your kind of temple scene in Jesus Christ Superstar.
Yeah.
Like it is interesting to see the parallels between them both musically, whereas Godspell is a lot more folky for a lot of the rest of it.
Yeah, those two songs that you mentioned as well are sort of rare moments in the show where it's more wedded to the Bible stories, as you said. So like the crucifixion, obviously, and the Alas for You is like, the moment of going into the temple or like telling off the Pharisees and the moneylenders or whatever it is. I don't really remember. But whereas, and the most of the lyrics for the songs, they're not directly from the Bible. They're from the Episcopal prayer book or songbook. That's where the lyrics came from, which is why they mostly sort of allude to Bible verses. And obviously Stephen Schwartz just wrote new music. Yeah, the way it developed is pretty unique in terms of, as I said, it started as a university project. And John Michael Tebelak, he essentially sort of devised it with the cast. He came into the room with songs, which were not the songs that Stephen Schwartz didn't come in until after the university production, but versions of the songs and the parables, and then they kind of workshopped each of the parables in the room. So, yeah, and then it transferred to Broadway, and they were just like, scrap all the music except for, there's one song, which they kept the music, which was By My Side / By Your Side, it's sometimes called.
Oh, yeah, which Peggy wrote, who was the original cast member.
Yeah, so that lasted from the university production, but everything else, the music was written by Stephen Schwartz. And it's surprising that looseness survived because it changed so much and was revised and new people were brought in, but they never were like, okay, but what's the narrative? Like, where's the I Want song? And, it's still just a bunch of parables and songs.
Yeah, it does feel very devised. And yeah, that's a really good point. It's not a traditional musical. You don't have an I Want song. You sort of have like a biblical song cycle, really. That's probably what we would call it if somebody wrote it now.
Hi, I'm just breaking in for a minute to ask you to consider donating to ID Know Yourself. It's an Aboriginal-led, not-for-profit mentoring organisation that supports Aboriginal young people in out-of-home care and those who have contact with the juvenile justice system. I first heard the founder Isaiah Dorr on the Always Was, Always Will Be Our Stories podcast, talking about his own experiences with out-of-home care as a kid and why he founded the organisation. I found him really inspiring. ID Know Yourself aims to establish belonging, discover purpose, and empower positive choices. You can learn more or make a tax-deductible donation at idknowyourself.com. There's a link in our episode description. As far as it has a narrative, it's just basically that, as you said, in Act 1, it's each of the cast members sort of like coming to Jesus, literally, with their songs, building the community, and then in Act 2 it sort of falls apart a little bit or is challenged.
Yeah.
But
it's very simply done too. It's a show that really does live or die by the direction of it and the cast that you put in it. Some shows you're like, great, everything that you need is on the page, and this is not one of them. The songs are bangers. There's some great songs in it.
100%. And look, we'll talk about the songs, I think, one by one in a minute, because they're so great. But one of the things that I think is very associated with the show is that look that we sort of touched on, which is it's sort of hippie, it's sort of clowny, and a lot of people will say that the actors are dressed as clowns. I don't think they're ever supposed to be dressed as clowns. I think it's just associations with the kind of like the big pants and the braces and that kind of counterculture clothes that they wore in the original production. But that is something that has sort of stuck with the show. Even when like they revive it now, they tend to still dress that way, which is interesting because there's no real reason to do that. There's no real reason why people shouldn't be dressed in modern clothes, you know?
Yeah, it's interesting too. I wonder if there's a similar conversation that gets had around the orchestrations of it, because it is so late 60s, early 70s folk rock. With kind of some gospel and soul influences in it. That I wonder if maybe the way that the music is and the way that it's orchestrated means that setting it in a more modern way might be really jarring. I don't know. Yeah,
I don't know either. I'm just looking at some images of the Broadway revival in 2011, which is sort of the only major Broadway production since the 70s. They're in... It's hard to know what they're in. They seem to have costumed it in a way that's like, it's kind of 2011, but it's also still kind of... They didn't want to go completely away. So there are some people wearing braces and things like that. But Jesus, who was Hunter Parrish, is like wearing like a t-shirt with a open shirt over it and things like that, you know, like open to interpretation, what that's supposed to be. And I think that's one of the reasons why, I mean, obviously the religious aspect is a bit daggy, but I think more than that, I think the association of that kind of hippie, not just visually, but also in the show itself, I think that's something that makes people think it's a little bit of a daggy show.
Yeah. It is really surprising to me that churches would not have been on board with it. It can be a really like sickly sweet show too. It can be really nauseating.
Oh, totally. I think we underestimate where churches were at in 1970.
It's probably true.
Like, it wasn't like now where there's churches all over where, you know, people play the guitar and sing, you know, like happy clappy stuff didn't really exist.
The rock version of the Our Father.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll tell you something that I learned from Wikipedia. Thank you, Wikipedia. Always a friend to us for these podcasts. When I was reading about the various different productions, that in South Africa, Godspell opened in Maseru, Lesotho in 1973, and then it was transferred to Johannesburg, where it was immediately banned on the grounds of blasphemy. But the general understanding was that it wasn't really about blasphemy. The problem was that it had both black and white cast members, which, of course, in South Africa in the early 70s was extremely controversial. And so it presented a challenge to apartheid, and the producers went all the way to the Supreme Court to challenge the ban and won their case.
Wow.
And so Godspell toured South Africa for 2 years and was a big sort of open doors for black actors and the possibility of black and white actors working together.
That's amazing. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's encouraging as well that it was a big success after all of that as well, because obviously it took a lot longer for white South Africans to actually be on board with dismantling apartheid.
Yeah.
The point is they did use blasphemy as the sort of excuse for banning the show.
They just can't see how there's any blasphemy in it. Like, it's almost... Because I was raised, like, proper Catholic, like sit in the front row so you're closer to God Catholic. And I remember for months afterwards that I'd be sitting there, and if it was the Gospel of Matthew, being like, oh, I literally know this Bible passage word for word because that's exactly what's in the show, you know? Yeah,
again, I think it's obviously such a different time, 50 years ago, that I guess maybe even depicting Jesus wearing a Superman t-shirt or whatever, like he did in the original production, even though we can clearly see that what they're trying to do is transmit that same essential message and communicate it in a way that will relate to a modern audience, but that at the time was considered too much.
Also, I had no idea that Victor Garber was Jesus in that movie version.
Oh my God.
That blew my tiny mind.
Victor Garber, who is obviously like a bit of a Broadway legend, but also was it Mr. Andrews in Titanic?
Oh yeah, he is in
Mr.
Titanic.
Andrews, Rose, listen to me. There aren't enough boats. You must get to a boat.
That's right.
Yes, that's what I always think of when I see him.
Oh, I always think of him as, is he Jennifer Garner's dad in Alias?
I don't know. I haven't watched
Or
it.
her
Sorry.
like manager? Anyway, I only think I watched
a
3
manager?
episodes, but obviously had an impact.
Sure. Why don't we talk about the songs? Because it's bloody hit. And I texted you the other day while I was watching the movie, and the reason I didn't watch the movie when we originally did it was just, this was the 90s. There was no proper internet. It certainly wasn't like watching movies on the internet. I guess it wasn't on TV. I don't know. I never got around to watching the movie. So I had never watched it until recently. And obviously it is extremely 70s and extremely kind of like all of the stuff we talked about Godspell. There is a tweeness to it, but it reminded me how amazing the music is. And I also thought the versions of the songs in the movie were really good.
Yeah.
It was a hit. So let's go through the song list. So Tower of Babel, we've already talked about. That was cut from the movie. It's cut from a lot of productions. Do we need it? Possibly not.
I like it, but I like anything that's hard to learn. Like the opening of Company in terms of like, know your part, stick to your part.
Sure, I don't have a problem with hard to
Count.
learn. It's hard to listen to that I have a problem with. I'm just
that
not
is
sure
fair enough.
what it brings to the show, like what does it add?
Yeah, also it's always done strangely in like full body like overalls over the costumes or like a robot like there's always something weird done with it because I think people don't know what to do with it.
You're right. I'd forgotten. I don't remember what we wore, but we did. I was saying that we wore the same costumes, but we didn't. We definitely had something over it. I don't remember what it was, but it was that thing of like, it was Sister Act 2. It was like, I'm wearing this stuff, and then the trumpet comes in, prepare you the way of the Lord. And we were like, oh my God, the band comes in. Yes, take off my clothes. I'm a disciple now. Prepare ye. Yeah, we did do that.
Yeah.
So I guess it gives some kind of context for John the Baptist to interrupt something and be like, no, guys, we're going to rock out with Jesus. Yeah, all right, I'll allow it. Okay. Do you remember who you played? In which philosopher?
The first time I was Robin, who's Day by Day, and then the second time I was Peggy, who's by my side.
But what about in the Tower of Babel, though? Which philosopher?
Oh, in the Tower of Babel? Oh, absolutely not. No. I have no idea.
I think I was Thomas Aquinas, but I might be wrong. Also, they've updated them now. They've changed them all. Yeah, they changed them for the 2011 Broadway revival, and now like you can license them, and it's like
Brene Brown, Russell Brand.
Got in front of me. So
Karamo.
Yeah, pretty much. So originally it was like Socrates, Thomas Aquinas, Martin Luther, Leonardo da Vinci, blah, 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 Jean-Paul Sartre, Friedrich Nietzsche. In the 2001 revival, a few of them were replaced by, Galileo, so not exactly updated. Jonathan Edwards, I don't know who that is.
Who?
Jonathan Edwards.
I'm looking at them now.
Jonathan Edwards,
No.
L. Ron Hubbard, and Marianne Williamson.
Oh, goodness.
2011 Broadway revival, Jonathan Edwards didn't make the cut, but Galileo made it, as did L. Ron Hubbard and Marianne Williamson. Yeah.
But then would they change the lyrics? Because these are literally versions of the philosophies of these.
They must have done. I don't have that information, I'm afraid.
I would allow a version of Tower of Babel where it's like influences. That would give me so much life.
It would also make more sense. I'd be more comfortable with it as an atheist. Yes, I'm coming out as an atheist on this podcast about Godspell. I'd be more comfortable with John the Baptist interrupting vacuous influences rather than the world's greatest philosophers.
Yes.
It's also famously not on the Broadway cast recording. Maybe it's on the revival cast recording, but it wasn't on the original. Well, it was actually off-Broadway cast recording. And the reason for that was that they wanted the album to be a pop hit. So they knew that starting with that song, people would be like, WTF is this about? So they started with Day by Day. Instead, it was a smash. And of course, it wasn't in the movie, so it wasn't on the movie soundtrack. So I think that's another reason why it was hard for us to learn, because we didn't have anything to listen to.
Yeah, fair enough.
Note bashing. Christ.
So then you get a conch shell and you get Prepare Ye the Way of the Lord, which is the only lyrics to that whole song.
Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Prepare ye the way of the Lord. You might get an everybody now.
Yeah.
But otherwise,
Yeah.
they're the only words.
That's true. And it's short.
And it's just a chorus. There's no verse.
Keep it simple. Why not?
Why not?
I'm up for it. It's easy to learn.
Yeah, easy to
We've
learn.
already spent all of our brain power on
After Tower of Babel, that's what you need.
Yes, Prepare You the Way of the Lord. That's fun. You get the idea of the show.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then what comes after that? It's a guitar one.
Save the People.
Oh, yeah, that's really cute.
Save the people.
Oh, God of mercy, when.
Very kind of like of its time.
But then you get that really nice breakdown at the end where it's a cappella and you get that 3, 4, 1. When will that.
Oh,
in,
that's
like,
true.
second harmony.
Yeah, they're big harmonies.
really
yeah.
nice.
Yeah. The songs are so good, but also like a lot of the arrangements and the harmonies and stuff really, really make it.
Yeah.
I think that's why watching the movie, hearing the songs properly for the first time in a while, reminded me how good they are because the orchestrations and the harmonies bring so much to it, as opposed to just like singing it in my head.
Yeah.
Then we get Day by Day. That's of course the breakout hit from the show.
Perfect.
It's a bloody good song.
It's a great song.
And apparently, a bit of trivia, it's the last time that a song hit the Billboard chart in an original cast recording. Does that make sense? So there were things after that, like Barbra Streisand doing Somewhere from West Side Story. But the actual original cast recording version of a song from a Broadway show, that's the last time that there was one on the Billboard chart.
Really? None of the Lloyd Webbers, the later ones?
No, I mean the albums, yes, but not the singles.
Wow.
Yes, this is what I learned.
See, that's so fascinating because it is a show that feels so dated now, but then would have been absolutely the exact sounds that you were hearing on the radio.
Yeah, I mean both Godspell and Jesus Christ Superstar were big radio hits.
Yeah. It's one of the things that I remember blew my mind when I was first listening to and reading about Hamilton is hearing Lin-Manuel Miranda talk about how the songs of music theatre used to be the pop songs of the day. And just at some point we decided that like, no, this is a music theatre sound. Mm-hmm. And that music theatre and pop music had gone in such different directions they don't even recognise each other. That I think we are seeing a kind of incredible renaissance now of that with shows like Hamilton or Six, where you're getting much closer to what the music of today actually sounds like.
Yeah.
It's really exciting.
Yes, absolutely. For some reason recently I was looking at like the list of like the best-selling album of every year in America, you know, since the beginning of the charts in the 40s or whatever. And for that all through the 40s, 50s and the early 60s, the majority of them were cast recordings. So it was, you know, the South Pacific cast recording, the Oklahoma movie soundtrack, the West Side Story movie soundtrack. Like, they were not just popular, but they were the biggest of the big. I think the My Fair Lady cast recording, was it My Fair Lady or South Pacific maybe, was like the biggest selling album 2 years in a row.
What?
Yes, but Adele did that too.
Far
Adele did that
out.
recently, 2 years in a row, biggest selling album. So. But that's the kind of level we're talking about. All right, where are we? So that was Day by Day. We love that. Learn Your Lessons Well.
Basic. Take it or leave it.
Not one of our faves, is it? Not one of our faves.
Also the way that it's pitched in like as being like, it's a comedy song. And I was like,
Well,
no.
there's a few of them.
False.
There's sort of a bit of a divide in the songs, I would say, between the ones that sound like pop hits, like we talked about, and then there's a few that are like sort of vaudeville-y, which I would say Learn Your Lessons Well is, as well as All for the Best and We Beseech Thee.
Yes.
There's a kind of like yakka yakka yakka, especially All for the Best, very consciously written that way.
Yeah, at least All for the Best leans in because it's like, you know, top hats and canes and soft shoe and Learn Your Lessons Well never really did it for me, especially also because is the next one Bless the Lord?
Bless the Lord, which is
I am
a hit.
Obsessed with this song. I love it so much.
Can you break that down for us?
It's so great the way the time signatures change.
Yeah.
So it's this really like ba-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's kind of like swingy and a bit rocky, and you get this really beautiful like, oh bless the Lord my soul, ba-da-da. Like you've got backing vocals, you've got BB Beast for life.
Worthy is love.
And then you get to all his benefits, the Lord to thee is kind, and then you go into double time and
Rockin'.
Yeah, the Lord to thee is and then 3-part. He will not always chide. Like it's just so camp.
Yeah.
And so like literally doubles the tempo, and then you go back to that swung verse, which is more exciting now because you're like, I know what's coming.
I'm ready.
And then she gets to this like crazy note at the end. I think it's probably like an A or something. But you have all this like, bless the Lord, bless major to minor, really simple changes. It's just so funky. I just have so much time for it.
They go through the slow bit faster again at the end. So you have like, oh, bless the Lord, it's really exciting. And it's a song that I had not remembered how much I liked it. I was like, oh yeah, I remember that song. And then in the movie, I was like, oh, I think I skipped back to watch it again at the end because I was like, that was a really good number.
Yeah, and the woman who sings it in the movie is just chef's kiss. She's so great. It's a song that I'm like, if only the lyrics were like, you would just never think to sing this for anything because it is so religious.
Yeah.
Which in some ways is kind of a shame.
I think that was the song that Lisa Campbell sang in our production at high school.
Oh, heaven.
Yes, I believe so. Hey, if you like Every Musical Ever, please check out our Patreon page. There's a link in the episode description below. It's a great way to support the show and allow us to keep paying theatre performers through this pandemic and beyond. You can support the show from as little as $5 a month. You'll get every episode early. You'll get extended video episodes. There are exclusive episodes like one on Australian musicals with Tom Sherrar and one on all 3 musical versions of A Star Is Born with Elise McCann. That'll be out soon. You'll get episodes released early, like our Avenue Q episode with Josie Lane, which will be on the main feed in 2021, but is currently up on Patreon. And you'll get all sorts of other extra content as a thank you for being a supporter for the show. Click the link in the episode description below to support the show. Thank you so much. Next one is All Good Gifts.
Oh, love a recorder solo. I played the recorder solo on the flute in our high school production.
Oh.
Actually, I think in both shows.
No recorder players available?
I could have played it on recorder, but they were like, let's do... The flute feels a bit nicer.
That's just a bit cooler. Okay. That's true.
Yeah.
The thing about All Good Gifts is that that's the only one that, like, I know the original hymn.
Oh.
Is it that not well known to you? Maybe it's a British thing.
No, it might be British.
Oh, okay. Well, I used to sing it in, like, the school assembly and stuff. But it's obviously a different tune.
Even All Good Gifts, which I had remembered as being like a bit of a snooze fest, I re-listened to and I still like the voicings and the way that you get that all good gifts around us. Ba-dum-bum-bum-bum. It's just that like classic 70s piano.
And then you have that very 70s like, I really want to thank you, Lord.
Thank you, Lord. Yes. So great.
Yes, it gets away with being sincere, which is always an achievement, especially in a show like this.
Yeah.
Finale of Act 1 is Light of the World.
Light of the World is another one where it's like, if you have a great voice on it, great. And if not, bit basic.
Right. I'm a fan of Light of the World because I just love the call and response thing.
Yeah.
Again, easy to learn. As long as you're not the soloist. You just repeat exactly what you just said.
Yeah. Also, you get to do, we all need help to feel fine.
Let's have some wine. Yeah.
If I wrote the lyric, we all need help to feel fine, let's have some wine, I would tell myself to quit.
It'd be like, Jill, this is not appropriate.
You have other skills. Go and teach. You've got nimble hands. Be a dental hygienist. Get out of here.
So Act 2, Turn Back, Oh Man. This is the sexy song.
Love it. It's just a really good way to learn a descending, what is it, a diminished fifth?
Don't ask me, Dal.
Turn back.
Oh, I see.
It's helpful for me. Oh, man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure I still really understand why it's like, let's have a sexy song here. But also, the lyrics aren't sexy, but it's just played in a kind of vampy, like,
No.
I'm sexy, Jesus, come and get me.
And then you get that weird middle section that Jesus sings, which is quite beautiful, which is all that, earth shall be fair and all
Yeah.
her children one. Which feels like he's reprimanding her, like it feels a bit like you, Jesus Christ, whatever it is,
Slut-shaming.
the soothing your forehead, all that kind of stuff. Yeah, slut-shaming, classic Jesus slut-shaming. But actually, none of the content of it is about that at all. Yeah, even what she's saying isn't provocative. Turn back, oh man, forswear thy foolish ways.
It's another sort of just like a pastiche. They were like, oh, we'll write this one like, again, sort of music hall, like a Mae West type vamp song. Even though
Yeah.
it doesn't really fit with what we're saying.
Even when I was watching the movie version, she does that kind of like, oh, Jesus, come here, I got something to show you.
yeah, she
But
does.
she doesn't have anything to show him.
I have literally nothing to show you.
I've got this feather boa that I found in a trunk behind the bin over there. Oh, see, I'm not smoking. No one was smoking this show. Like, it's just a boo. Like, there's just nothing about it that is actually provocative at all.
Yeah.
But it still does feel like she gets reprimanded, which is quite strange.
If there's more of a reason to that we're missing, please email us or
Please tell
comment.
us.
Alas for You, we've already touched on.
Love it. It's in 7, I think, which is fun.
Right, it's in something hectic, definitely. Yeah, and that's Jesus getting a bit... there's a little bit of narrative there. Jesus getting angry with the... What is he... Is it the moneylenders in the temple? Is that what it is? Or is it the Pharisees?
Yeah, Pharisees. And you kind of play the Pharisees as like these... They're like weird, big sort of garbage robots in the film, and I've only ever seen them be
yes,
some
they
weird
are.
version of that.
So the role of Jesus, it's not... Just looking at the songs that he sings, which the main ones, according to this list here, Save the People. He obviously does All for the Best with Judas. Then Alas for You. Beautiful City, if that's in, which is obviously from the movie. And then the finale. So it's not as challenging a singing role as... Like, he doesn't get the most challenging songs, I guess.
In terms of like doing an 8-show week, it's a good show for that because everybody kind of has their one-ish
That's
number.
true, yeah.
It isn't that kind of prominent role. He does have to do a lot of the talking, a lot of that kind of heavy lifting.
I think I remembered it because the guy who played Jesus in our high school production was like by far and away the best singer, like, at our school. Like, he was always playing the leads in shows because he had this glorious voice. And so I think I sort of remembered it that way because I knew what a great singer he was. I'm sure he sang it beautifully. This is interesting to literally no one but me. It's like, it's not actually that big a singing role. Next is By My Side, which we already mentioned is the only song where the music is kept from the original university version. So the music wasn't written by Stephen Schwartz. But he apparently just thought it was a really nice song. Was like, don't need to rewrite this one, keep it.
Again, really beautiful, but like lyrically a bit strange.
Oh, that's the one about putting a pebble in your shoe and the pebble's called Dare.
I will call the pebble Dare.
Well, don't you ever call me unprepared because I was bloody reading about this today. StephenSchwartz.com. There's like a frequently asked questions with answers from Stephen Schwartz. Needless to say, one of the questions from someone was basically, what the fuck is this song about? And he got Peggy to answer it because obviously she wrote it. Where is it? By My Side. Okay. So people saying, can you talk about the meaning behind the lyrics, specifically the part about a pebble in my shoe and why it's called Dare? We were all thinking it. Right. And so Steve got Peggy Gordon to answer the question and she said, okay, she asked him where he is going. She gleans that he's going far beyond where the horizon lies. Where the horizon lies. And she wishes to go with him. But she's fearful and must dare herself to take the journey with him. She puts the pebble in her shoe to show him that she has faith. She will walk with her courage, and when she no longer needs this symbol of her courage, she will take it from her shoe, singing Meet Your New Road. Then she'll be ready to join him. She reaches out to take his hand and tells him that she's finally glad to be there by his side. Now, it's an extraordinary FAQ because the original questioner then comes back and says, that helps a little, but I still don't get. She puts the pebble in her shoe to show him that she has faith. Is it the pain/suffering from the pebble that demonstrates faith? If so, why is the pebble called Dare? Answer from Peggy Gordon. It's not the pain of the pebble! It's the challenge of walking with this pebble. No, I was interpreting it dramatically. Oh, it's not the pain of the pebble. It's the challenge of walking with this pebble that she masters sufficiently to know that she can walk with him anywhere that he may go. She calls the pebble Dare because she needs to challenge herself to overcome her fearfulness so that she can walk with him anywhere he may go. So it's not the pain, it's the challenge. And the pebble is called Dare because she knows she needs to challenge herself. Giving
Very
you
clear.
the answers.
I just love that someone would just come for Peggy Gordon like that on a fan forum. Is
yeah,
so
thanks for the answer. But still, it makes no sense.
Just so great.
So, beautiful song. All right, next is We Beseech Thee.
So basic. Hate it. Can't be about it.
Agree. And I remember, even when doing it at high school, even in my, non-questioning, just happy to be here, easy to work with, phase of high school musicals, being like, this song,
also,
choppy,
you have to do all those weird sound effects that are like... You have to do all these like boing, boing, ooey, ooey, and they're all orchestrated like
clowny.
Boom chicka, boom chicka, chick chick, and it's just
blind.
Oh.
Yeah, okay, so we're cutting that from our production. Now, next, in the Broadway revival version and in many versions now, comes Beautiful City, which is from...
Oh, yes.
Was written for the movie and is often put into the show now, which I think is a bloody good song. I'm a fan.
It's a great song. It's gorgeous. It's particularly beautiful in the film where you actually get to see the city. That really makes a difference.
But also, Stephen Schwartz rewrote the lyrics, and he now says that he hates, I repeat, hates the original lyrics. He thinks, in fact, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to go back to stephenschwartz.com, your source for all of Stephen's opinions about Godspell.
All things Stephen Schwartz.
He says, because he rewrote the lyrics after the LA riots, and they're sort of about LA, but not specifically about LA. I don't have them to hand here, though. He says, I feel that the new lyrics are vastly superior to the ones used in the movie, which I find drippy and somewhat cloying. So I'd hope that wherever it's used in the show, directors would use the new lyrics. And someone else says, I like the old lyrics of Beautiful City better. Stephen Schwartz, I don't agree with you about the old lyrics to Beautiful City. It's so sentimental, it makes my flesh crawl. I much, in capitals, prefer the rewritten lyric. On the Willows.
Obsessed. Love On the Willows.
On the Willows is the song that I sang in our production.
Oh, usually the band sings it.
Yes, that's true, but not in our version.
I'm obsessed with On the Willows because it's the first song I ever heard that isn't a true, this is very nerdy, 6/4 and not a 6/8.
Okay.
Just blew my nerdy 14-year-old mind. It just had not.
I wish you'd been there when I did it, so you could explain that to me.
I really like it. It just has such a laid back kind of passing a joint around feel. I think it's really
totally. There's something happening visually. I don't remember because I was just
They're passing
singing
the bread around.
Right. Okay. So I was just standing there singing, and what we did was, cause we used hand mics in our production because it was a bit edgy and a bit cool. But I sang without a microphone. Ethel Merman here didn't need a microphone.
Sing out, Louise.
That was to contrast it because we didn't have the band singing it, but I just sort of sat and with the two other boys who sang my BVs, we just sang it. unamplified, and that was going on. It's like scoring, underscoring.
Yeah,
it's a
very
beautiful
much.
song.
Well, often it's done as an instrumental. Again, lyrically, on the willows there we hung up our lyres, of our captors they're required, of us songs and our tormentors' mirth.
Yes, well, to go back to StephenSchwartz.com, there was a lot of questioning about, is it lyres or lives? Because a lot of people say, we hung up our lives, and apparently in the original Broadway production, it was we hung up our lives, but in the published sheet music, it's we hung up our lyres. And Stephen Schwartz basically said, well, yes, in the original hymn, it is we hung up our lyres. That is the correct lyrics. But the director of the off-Broadway production said they're not going to hear lyres. And if we just sing we hung up our lives, it gives the same impression like we gave up our whole lives to be with you, etc. So he says you can do both, but he said I sort of regret that now. I think we should stick with lyres. They dumbed it down a bit, so we're like, it's going to sound like lives anyway, so let's just sing lives because it'll still make sense.
My memory of the sheet music, and I might have made this up, is that it's lyres the first time and lives the second time.
Oh, interesting. Well, maybe there's different
maybe
versions floating around.
There's all kinds of different versions floating around, so who knows?
Yeah, and I do remember that from singing at the time, being like, everyone thought I was singing lives anyway, so it's a waste of time. Okay, and then we get to the finale, which again we've touched on already.
Banging.
Of course, the immortal lyrics: "Oh God, I'm dying. Oh God, I'm dying. Oh God, I'm dead. Oh God, I'm dead." That is hard to sell.
Poor every teenage Jesus that has had to sing, "Oh God, I'm dead."
One of the things we ripped off in the movie was the chain link fence, and so we were there going, "No, Jesus, don't die. We need you." Just rocking the chain link fence very dramatically. It's very rewarding.
What I enjoy is that always you clearly have your Jesus is like standing on some kind of small platform attached to the fence, so it looks like he's hanging there, but you can see where he's standing on. He looks very comfy and well supported.
We can see you, Jesus. Yes.
We know you're not dead.
Agree. And now, another reason why the churches weren't too happy about the show, and also another thing that it has in common with Jesus Christ Superstar, is that it shows the crucifixion, but not the resurrection.
Yeah.
Which apparently that was one reason why people weren't happy about it, because they were sort of suggesting that it was saying that Jesus never rose again, etc. And there's various interpretations, like, for example, does the fact that Jesus comes back out for the curtain call, is that his resurrection, and all this sort of thing. And I do remember in our production, he sort of like jumped up again. We were carrying him, and he was like, boing, I'm alive again. It was all just a joke.
It's a funny little shot. Like, I remember also as a teenager being like, you have to cry for real in this bit. Just looking probably insane, like staring at a spot and not blinking, and then being like, imagine your whole family's dying. Just to get a single tear.
The wonderful thing is how it's so open to interpretation. You can do whatever you want with it. But the problem with that is that many people, including most of us in high school, have very poor ideas about, like, let's just have Jesus spring back up at the end. That'll be the resurrection.
Yeah. So camp.
So what we've learned is it's very loose, it's very open to interpretation, but what is bloody rock solid and indestructible are the songs, the wonderful songs.
Glorious.
We're fans.
Absolutely.
Before we go, I just want to talk quickly about different productions. So we already talked about how it started off as a university production at Carnegie Mellon University in 1970. That was before Stephen Schwartz was even involved. Then they brought in Stephen Schwartz to rescore it, and it debuted at the Cherry Lane Theatre, which is like a sort of a proper grown-up off-Broadway theatre, and then transferred to the Promenade Theatre. So it played for like 5 years off-Broadway, so it was a big hit. It didn't transfer to Broadway, I think, until 1976, but it had already become like a big hit and very well known by that point. The second production in the world after the off-Broadway production was Gillian Cosgriff in Melbourne, Australia.
Colette Mann was in the original Melbourne production.
Yes, Colette Mann and Colleen Hewitt and John Waters.
Heaven.
Yeah, John Waters, I think, was in it when it
John
went to Sydney.
Sydney season.
Yeah. So, and there was just that time, like, Hair came over here very quickly. Grease came over here really quickly. Obviously, Rocky Horror. And, all of those casts in Australia had, some people who became, like, legends of theatre in our country. It was a very fertile time. Even though they were bringing shows over from America and the UK, that, the really burgeoning creatives in Australia who all got their starts in those shows. The London production, 1971, featured Julie Covington, who people will know from the Evita cast recording, David Essex.
And Marty Webb.
Marty Webb. And Jeremy Bloody Irons,
oh, God,
later
I
Oscar
didn't
winner.
even see that.
Jeremy Irons was in Godspell, which I think is delightful.
Was he? He must have been Judas. I'm just basing that off Scar. I just assume it's him playing Scar, playing Judas.
Oh, that'd be camp. That would be camp. And then there was the legendary Toronto production, the Canadian production of Godspell in 1972, which launched the careers of a whole bunch of legendary performers. Victor Garber, who's obviously in the movie and in Titanic, Rose, you must get to a lifeboat. Eugene Levy, Andrea Martin, Gilda Radner, Martin Short. They were all in that Godspell production. They were all newcomers. And Paul Schaefer, who later wrote It's Raining Men and was the band leader on Letterman, he was the musical director.
This is insane. I had no idea. That is
Yeah.
mind-blowing.
That Toronto production is sort of weirdly legendary because it started the career of so many of these people who went on to massive careers, yeah.
Drawn from local performers instead of a touring cast. Well, see, that's what you get.
Exactly.
A bunch of greats. Heaven.
You want to cast stars? Create them.
That's right.
And we already talked about the South African production, which helped to destroy apartheid 20 years later.
Sure.
And in the Broadway revival in 2011, Hunter Parrish played Jesus. Do you know who that is? Do you ever watch Weeds?
No, I have not.
He was the son in Weeds. He was also, I think he was in Spring Awakening on Broadway. The Jesus, it's sort of easy to cast Jesus as like teen idol-y. So it happens in Jesus Christ Superstar as well sometimes. And it's like, it's difficult because who the hell do you cast? I think someone like Victor Garber is ideal, who's just sort of like charismatic but strange, as opposed to like good-looking all-American blonde boy, which is what Hunter Parrish is.
Yeah, he does have that weirdly like quiet and kind of like peaceful, like not judging you, but maybe a bit helping you in a way that might feel a bit judgy.
Helping you get to the lifeboats because there aren't enough.
Yeah, exactly. Very important quality in Jesus.
You know who else was in that 2011 Broadway revival? In the Broadway revival was Uzo Aduba, who's Crazy Eyes from Orange is the New Black.
What?
Yes.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yes. Good old Uzo. She's marvellous. I'd never heard her sing, but
She's
obviously
so
she
good.
can. Let's put her in a bloody musical. She sang By My Side.
Yes. Also, in the 2000 off-Broadway version, Shoshana Bean and Leslie Kritzer.
It attracts good performers, like the two of
It
us.
attracts people in a way that's, yeah, exactly, like us. Us and Jeremy Irons. I do think it is that kind of a show, though, where it's like, if you could cast, like, improvisers and comedians,
Oh, totally.
you know, like, you're going to get a completely different show to if you cast people that can fulfill a brief and do what's on the page, because what's on the
Yes.
page is weird.
What you need is improvisers and comedians who also have really beautiful, soulful voices. So
Yes, which they're
a
so easy
challenge.
to come by, a dime a dozen. I mean, literally,
Exactly.
look who's behind you. There's one right there, Josie Lane.
Josie Lane,
Stunning.
Josie Lane behind me on the wall. That's true. She rocked
Hilarious.
Godspell.
Voice for
she
days.
rocked bloody
Yeah.
Godspell. I think that is the contrast for me in terms of if I was doing a production of Godspell. I mean, ideally, obviously, you do find your Josie Lanes and your Gillian Cosgriffs who have wonderful voices, but also have that improvisational nature. But I think you'd have to find that balance because the songs just need
Yeah.
those glorious voices to do them justice.
I mean, also, if you have a great director, then that's half the
Well,
way.
unfortunately, my production wouldn't have a great director, so I would very much need actors to do the work for me. That's my philosophy. Should know that by now. Oh, man.
Every musical ever, you go somewhere ever, no scrap whatsoever. Skip an episode never. Every musical ever, squeeze.
Thank you to Gillian Cosgriff for that conversation about Godspell. I had such a good time. You might have been able to tell that when I had that conversation with Jill, I didn't know that I was going to be speaking to Stephen Schwartz. I did raise a few of the things that we discussed with him. That conversation will be out on Friday in our encore episode. Make sure you hit subscribe so that you get that as soon as it comes out. Here's a little clip from my chat with Stephen Schwartz about Godspell.
It shouldn't matter whether you believe this guy was actually divine or not, whether you really believe that he was the Son of God and came back, after 3 days and so on and so forth. That's not what the show is about. The show is about what he taught and the way he said to live and how a community forms around that and then recognizes its responsibility to carry that message forward. That's what happens at the end of the show, is the rest of the community comes together again, and we see that they are going to spread this message out into the world. But then, when people were upset about there being no resurrection, we would say, well, look at the bows. There he is.
Thank you for listening to Every Musical Ever. I'm your host, Richard Carroll. This theme music was composed and performed by Brent Hill, with the alternative version performed by Sheridan Harbridge. The artwork for the show was designed by Achi. The introduction, content warning, and outroduction were read by Leo Campbell. Please rate and review us wherever you found this podcast. Find us on social media at Every Musical Pod and visit our Patreon for more content. See you next week.
Every musical ever.
Thank you for listening to Every Musical Ever. If you liked it, you can give a star review on the Apple Podcast app or wherever you found this podcast. And don't forget to subscribe.